Morning, everybody. Last week, so it's all thoughts to getting ready for exams, etc. So what we're going to be doing this morning is about numeracy. So some of you who like numeracy, who love numeracy, who have a gift with numbers, this is a nice, leisurely review of formulas and how to work out healthcare-related calculations. For those of you that are not quite as in love with numbers, this will hopefully give you the confidence that you can do it. We're not out to catch you out with this. We know that the more you practice, the better you get. If you've got anxiety, it doesn't always help when you're trying to work out the calculations. You'll have had a chance to practice the quizzes, and you'll have seen there that they will look very much like the assessment. So your exam, your 10 questions, multiple choice. So the key thing is that you get to learn the formulas and conversions, I think, is the key. Before I came across, I found a really nice piece from the NHS about medicines management and things that have gone wrong, so medication errors that have gone wrong. And numeracy relates very closely to medication errors. Shh. And it talks about medication errors that have been resolved since between 2015 and 2020. So there were about 1,500 claims relating to medication errors. About 500 of them have been settled with damages paid. The damages were £35 million. And that's without the solicitors and legal fees costs. £35 million that has been paid out. 500 of the claims were found not to have any merit, and the other 500 remain open. So there might be another £35 million to be paid out if the ones that are the claims that are still open are counted for. That doesn't include, so it might be sort of life-limiting illnesses, it may be that the functionality of that individual, or it may well be the worst-case scenario and death of that individual because of the medicines that we've given. It does break it down further into sort of different parts, and I will put this on just because I think it's quite interesting. One, because it's medicine management, and the other because it links in very much with our drug calculations and the errors that can occur. It talks about the claims, and it's specifically about the claims. It talks about medication error processes, and it was one element. It wasn't a build-up of that the doctor had written it wrong or the prescriber had written it wrong and then the nurse had gone and got the wrong drug out the cupboard and given the wrong dose. It was actually one element that actually was the problem. And the biggest element that was the problem was drug administration. So it's something that we're going to all be doing over the next 3 years under supervision. But once you've qualified, that it opens up that event that it might happen. Looking at and breaking it down even further, which I found really interesting, they identified the claims and looked at what they were. The biggest one was the wrong dose. So that links very clearly in with medicines management, drug calculations, and then giving the patient the drugs there. The next one that came after that was the wrong drug. So it's all falling down to that administrator, really. Because even if it's prescribed incorrectly, as a healthcare professional, as a qualified healthcare professional, we should identify that and we should then rectify that. So it doesn't matter that it might have been prescribed wrongly and gone through those processes. It's down then to us as healthcare professionals, as qualified nurses, to identify that. So that's hence when it comes to new drugs is check, double check, make sure that it is correct and the right dose for that patient. The common drugs that will cause the sort of problems were anticoagulants, which nearly every medical patient will have when they're in hospital. When we talk about anticoagulants, we're talking about heparin, warfarin, apixaban, all those sort of things that stop people clotting, their blood clotting. And sometimes it's because we haven't given it, sometimes because we've given it post-procedure and they've bled to death. And the others are antimicrobials, I can't even say, antibiotics, and opiates, so very strong pain relief. And they're the key drugs that have caused those long-term problems. One of the highlights, the main errors, is failure to calculate and administer the correct dosage of drugs is one of the key things. And that's just in this, it came out in March 2022. I'll put it on Canvas if you're interested, but I just think it fits nicely with today's session. If you go and talk in practice, or if you've got friends who are nurses or working, administrating medicines or working in healthcare, a lot of them will say, if they look at your calculations, say, I can't do those. But that's because they're not regularly doing those calculations. Depends where you work to what sort of calculations that you're working. So it might be, if you're in outpatients department, it might be BMIs. Luckily, there's a nice computer calculation. You type everything in and it works it out for you. But we still need to know those formulas. If you're working in children's areas or you're working in NICU, you're going to be doing some very high calculations that relate to weight and the dosages that are required and how many mils per hour that individual. Just sit down quickly if you don't mind, sorry. And working out the calculations. So wherever you work, you will end up doing some numeracy. But even fluid balance, that's a numeracy, isn't it? Because every 24 hours we have to add everything up, work out whether it's a positive or negative balance, whether there's too much stayed in within the patient or there's too much fluid that has gone out and that patient might end up being dehydrated. Thinking about if you're working in a GP surgery, if you're working in a pre-assessment clinic, it might be working out how many units that individual drinks of alcohol per week, and that might identify problems. It may well be that we want to weigh the patient because we're going to give anaesthetics or we're going to give certain drugs that needs to be very finite, because if we give slightly too much or too little, that individual will not progress in the way that we want them to. So there are lots of ways, but healthcare professionals will always say they don't really do numeracy. We never do numeracy in practice, but it's things that we take for granted, that we just see it as part of our role. It's a bit like if you speak to healthcare professionals who don't say they don't have a lot to do with technology. We're using computers all the time, but because it's everyday things that we do, we don't tend to consider that as it being important. So the aim of the session is that we're going to sort of think about how we get the answers, that you'll feel more comfortable with the different calculations, think about the formulas, and hopefully feel a little bit more prepared for the numeracy assessment. As I say, 10 questions. You've got to get 8 of those right because you've got to get 80%. Key things I would say about when it comes to exams and any exam, and Helen will talk more about it later, is read the question, maybe not just once, but read it twice or 3 times, because if you've been practicing certain formulas, you will be thinking, oh, that's what they're going to ask me, and rush in and do the answer. The thing that will help you all is that it is multiple choice. But don't just look at the numbers, look at the units. We're not bothered how you work it out. I don't care how you work your answers out. You can be doing it on your fingers, you can have your own formulas in your head. You don't have to do it like school where you've got to do it one way and write your calculations down because you might get a mark for that. You won't get a mark for putting down your calculations, because if it's wrong and that might kill the patient. So what we want is the right answer. And that's what we're concerned about when it comes to numeracy. And we want to prevent any more events in that to try and reduce that £35 million that it costs the individuals every year. So one quote, and this is from the Royal College of Nursing, and it talks about one of the difficulties with healthcare professionals is seeing how numeracy fits in everyday practice. And because we do it so often, it works. And it could be measuring the urine, checking your CDs every day, making sure that the right number's there, weighing your patient on admission. That's one thing that we're not always so good at, and there is a big push on sort of making sure that patients are weighed on admission, because it will affect sort of the drugs that we give, and more so when we're becoming more aware of older people needing to monitor their weight and the drugs that they're giving, because their bodies are not as able as sort of younger adults to cope with the dosages that are prescribed. So we're going to start with conversion charts. We're going to think about conversion. One of the key things that we need to know about is the order that those units go in. So we'll always start with those heaviest units, which are kilograms, and that will then convert to grams, milligrams, micrograms, and then nanograms. My suggestion is this is worth learning, because this is going to be something that will be useful throughout your career, especially when you go into the cupboard and the doctor's prescribed milligrams and you've only got micrograms in the cupboard. It's about converting that and making sure that you're confident with it. This is a ladder approach. This doesn't work for the way my brain works, but the general principles is if you're going from a higher unit to a lower unit, you need to multiply. And if you're going from a lower unit to a higher unit, you need to divide. So it's about working out whether you're going to divide by 1,000 or multiply by 1,000. And it can take you excessively wrong if you get it the wrong way round. So if you're going to change kilograms into grams, so if you've got 2 kilograms and you want to change it into grams, you're going to multiply that by 1,000. If you want to go to milligrams from kilograms, the way I do it, and this is the way my brain works, is I would multiply it by 1,000 and then multiply it by 1,000. You can't multiply it by 2,000 because you don't get the same answer. So you either do it by 1,000,000 or you can do it in that stepped approach. I prefer the stepped approach because then I know I can see that I've done the first 1,000 and the next 1,000. When you use a calculator, sometimes it's easy to not put enough zeros in or put too many zeros in. So if you are taking a calculator into your numeracy assessment, make sure that you're comfortable with using that calculator, that the buttons don't stick. I've got one calculator, I love it, it's just got a bit old, and that one of the buttons sticks. And it means that every time I press that number, I end up pressing it twice because I feel as I've got to double press it even harder. So that might sound a bit of a daft thing to say, but if you are going to use a calculator, have a practice with it. Make sure you know where the numbers are. Make sure that they are easy. And you'll only be using a simple calculator. So don't be using anything that you can store any information on. Those complicated calculators. So literally, subtraction, division, multiplication, and there might be a percentage button on there. So when you're in your assessment and on the front of the computer, people will be coming round looking at your ID badge to make sure it is you. Who'd go and sort of falsely sit in an exam and sit in a numeracy exam? I'm not sure about that. I like numbers. As I say, I do like numbers, but I wouldn't put myself in that difficult situation. But they'll be looking at your calculator as well as your ID. So they will be checking that because they want to make sure it is you, but you haven't brought in any of your information on that calculator if it stores any information. So take the simple one, otherwise they'll be taking it off you. You could use the calculator on the computer, not a problem, but I prefer to sort of have something that I'm working with rather than clicking on the computer. It's just my personal choice. Probably a little bit old-fashioned, but it works for me. So make sure that you sort of get these in the right order, because there will be questions that we're going to practice, but there will be questions. If you've practiced any of the quizzes, you will see there are some questions where you're given 2 different units. And any calculations that we do when we do our numeracy, we need to make sure we're working in the same units. This is my preferred way of choice. It's the same thing, same information, it just makes me feel much better seeing it that way, written out more linear rather than in that ladder stepped approach. The reason why I do like it is because the way the arrows go, and this is the simplistic part of me. I'm a simple girl, I like things nice and simple, but it helps me remember and it tells me which way my decimal point will be going. So it tells me at the top there I'm going to the right, and that means I need to multiply, and then the arrow's going to the left at the bottom if I'm moving from one to the other, so from nanograms to micrograms. Same principles still apply. If we're going from grams to micrograms, we would still need to either multiply it by 1,000,000 or by 1,000 to get the next result, and then by another 1,000. Whatever works for you. You know, if I'm teaching you to suck eggs, stick with what you know. But it's just giving you those ideas of how you can do this and how it works for you. So choose whichever way. One of the things I would do is if I was going into the exam and I've got the formulas in my head, I would, as I sit down and they say you can start writing or you can start the exam, is I would probably ask for a spare piece of paper and write all my formulas down. Get them out of my head so I can concentrate on the exam. You've got an hour for the numeracy exam. Most people are out in very, very good time, so just by writing those formulas down won't waste your time at all. It will give you that opportunity to clear your headspace and then sort of get on and do the exam. The other thing I would do, it's not that I think about exams on a large basis, but I would always do the questions I could do easily first. That would be my way of getting my confidence up, because you're going to be nervous. Plus, you're not wasting a lot of time if you get embroiled in one question and you sort of like you focus on that and you've lost 20 minutes because you've been doing that question for 20 minutes. So just be aware, think about your strategies, and this is for all of your exams and every exam. Always read the question maybe twice or 3 times. Make sure you know what's been asked of you, that you feel comfortable that you know what's been asked of you. Make sure that you sort of think about doing the easy questions first, or the ones that you feel more comfortable with. And I would always sort of try and remember my formulas and write them down as quickly as possible. That's what I would do. The other thing is try and block everybody else out, because there's nothing more distressing than you sort of plodding your way through and doing it really methodically and working it through, and then you're aware of people getting up and leaving the exam. That would stress me out, because I'd be thinking, oh my God, I should be catching up with everybody else. But that goes for calculations in practice as well. Don't ever feel that you've got to be rushed to work things out. Don't ever feel that you need to be keeping up with everybody else at the same time as those calculations. When I was working in coronary care and we had a difficult calculation to do, I would often go away in a quiet place, do my calculation and come back and say, this is what I've got. Because if anybody sits over my shoulder and says, oh, you do this, you do that, you do the other, it just causes me to get that red mist to come down. And I just can't see it through. And then it makes you stress, because you think, am I just taking the answer because that's what they've told me it is, or whether it's because it is the right answer. So just beware of that. If you're feeling really creative, you can draw yourself a box like this, and some people like to use bits like this, the conversion, and it does work. You can go from micrograms to milligrams, so it's telling you to divide by 1,000. You can do milligrams to grams, divide by 1,000. It works. That'd be too complicated for me, but some people like things like that. People are very visual or have got a photographic memory, and it works. So whatever works for you is what you should use, is my theory. So if we wanted to look at how many micrograms are there in 0.145 milligrams, so we want to convert from milligrams to micrograms, so we need to multiply by 1,000. So it gives you that way of working out. Or if you like the linear approach, or if you like the ladder approach, just think and visualize it in your head. Or if you've got it written down on your piece of paper, you can have a look and work it. Reason why I like the linear one is because, as I say, the arrows work for me, but also I visualise things. And yeah, it looks very simple, but it really does sometimes help you if you're not quite sure of what you're doing. If you're multiplying by 1,000, then we need to move our decimal point 3 places, and that will give us 145 micrograms. If we wanted to go to nanograms, then we would have to multiply that again, and that would give us a lot of micrograms, 145,000. We wouldn't necessarily, some of the practice questions that I've got for you to do, we wouldn't necessarily be making you transfer, but it's good practice. It just makes you think of how many, you know, where do I move my decimal points? Am I multiplying by 1,000 or dividing by 1,000? Another thing that I'm sure you did in when you did your medicines management, if it looks excessive, it probably is excessive. So check it again. It's a bit like checking your bank account. I love it at this time of the year. I know I've no money. I was working out how much money I had left to last me till, is it Wednesday when I get paid? And worked out, and I thought, great, I've got money left, I can go and spend, I can buy something. I thought, best just check it again. No, I can't. So sometimes it's worth just checking, you know, I never have any money left at the end of the month, so I thought it was rather strange. So that's what made me think, should I check again and make sure that I don't put myself into that negative overdraft. There we are, there's a few for you to do, so I'll give you a few minutes just to have a practice. So now if you haven't written down the formula, you wish you'd done that. Or if you've got your slides out, you're sorted. I'll put you this up just as a bit of a help. Some of these are extreme, but it's just more for practice and thinking about what you need to do. How are you doing? Yeah. Have you nearly finished? Got a few more minutes? I'll give you till past, so you've got 2 minutes. Okay then. Right, what we're going to do is just go through the answers. So have a look, we'll talk through the answers and see how we've got on. Again, you can use this presentation and have another practice if you find there's something that you've got a little bit stuck on. And all it is about multiplying by 1,000 or dividing by 1,000. So kilograms to grams, we're going from a higher unit to a lower unit, so we need to multiply by 1,000, and so that's going to be 45,000 grams. Remember, I've put the units there for everyone. I have cheated a little bit, I will confess. For micrograms, we should write it out actually in full, but just to save space on here and make it sort of look nice and straight, and same as with nanograms, so there's no mistakes. 94 grams to milligrams, so we're going from a larger unit to a smaller unit, so we're going to be multiplying by 1,000, so 94,000 milligrams. So remember that when you do write your answers down, and I know that this is multiple choice, but if you're doing this in an exam or for real in practice, always make sure that you write your units down. It's just good practice. So we're going from micrograms to milligrams now, so we're going the opposite way, so we're going from a lower unit to a higher unit, so we need to divide by 1,000. So we've got 1,500 micrograms there to milligrams, and that's going to end up being 1.5 milligrams. Micrograms to milligrams again, so we're going to be dividing 0.075 milligrams, and these are the ones that we wouldn't necessarily be doing in practice because there's room for a lot of error if we're converting there, but it's just to give you that example of moving your decimal points or multiplying by 1,000. So now we want to go from milligrams to nanograms. So that means we need to multiply by 1,000 and then multiply by another 1,000 because it's a stepped approach, or you can multiply by 1,000,000, and the answer for this one is 5,000 nanograms. Next one is 0.075 grams to milligrams, so we're going from grams to milligrams, so it's multiplied by 1,000, 75 milligrams. And the last one is micrograms to grams, so that's a double step change there. So we've got 15,000 micrograms to get it to grams, and that's going to be 0.015 grams. Fairly straightforward. Just need to get those ladders and the order of the units in your mind. Okay then. Beware we might be using this, beware we might be using this conversion in a lot more of the questions as we go along. So it's something that might sneak in as you go along with some of the questions. So sometimes we have to work out how many tablets a patient wants. We don't always go to that drug trolley and find the exact dosage of what that patient has been prescribed. So sometimes we'll have to work out, there might be a loading dose of tablets, so starting with, steroids, they end up with quite a high dose and we gradually decrease down over a period of time. Or it might be that somebody deteriorates and we need to increase their medication to preload them before we do a procedure. So there's different ways that we can work it out. So this patient requires 600 milligrams of a drug. He's already had that morning 75 milligrams, so we don't want to overdose him. So we're going to have to do a calculation before we actually work out how many tablets that he has. And each tablet, when we go to the trolley, all the tablets are in 75 milligrams for that drug. We don't have a 600 milligram tablet, and we couldn't give it to the patient anyway because we'd already given them 75 milligrams. So the first part of the question will be, let's find out how many milligrams that patient wants after we've given this 75. So he needs 525 milligrams of that drug to load him up before he goes for a procedure. How we work out how many tablets we would give that patient for that 525 milligrams will depend on you, and you will see in practice lots of different ways of doing it. It might be the ratio method where you go 75, 150, 225, 300 and keep adding them all up as we go along. So we could do it that way. Or we could actually use the need and have method. Need and have method, it works for tablets, so solid medications. We also can use need and have when we look at liquids, but we would add solutions onto that. So it's going to be need divided by have. So we need 525 milligrams. We have in that cupboard, in that trolley, in that bottle there, 75 milligrams, and that's the highest dose that we've got. So it's going to be need divided by have, and then working out how many tablets that he's got. So you've got a couple of different ways of doing it. If you're good with your 75s and you're happy to put them in the pot, that's fine. There's no problem with that. Use your fingers if you wish, or you could use your calculator and need divided by have. And if you've worked it all out or you've done it, 7 tablets. Yeah? So it's a nice, easy fallback way of working out how many tablets that individual needs. I do apologise. I have colour-coded it, and it's not because I don't think you can do it, but if I was learning new things sometimes, rather than just being told, I like to see where my numbers come from. So it's just so you can associate it and see where it is. If you're really good at maths, you don't need that, but sometimes it's just nice to be able to pick out and work out what's actually required as you go along. There, we ask some questions for you. Lots of words. Requires means that they've been prescribed, etc. Shh. You wouldn't. The chances are it's going to be prescribed in sort of four times that tablet or 6 times. So you should always get that. Occasionally you might get a half, and it's not standard practice. But if it's a loading dose or a test dose, we probably would do that. It's just getting the words the right way around, I think. Okay, how are you getting on? Do you want a couple more minutes? Okay. So remember, you need to identify what the patient needs. So if it says prescribed, requires, it means that that's what the patient needs. What you have is it says what's in the cupboard or in the trolley or is available. That means what there is there for you to use and dispense to the patient. Sometimes it's the terminology that sometimes throws you off a little bit. But just be aware, read it carefully. If you don't like all the words, just ignore them. Just look for the numbers and write down need and have. Get rid of the words. You get used to the words. I've written them in lots of different ways because there's that option. I don't write the exams, so they might have different ways of wording things. So that's why I've done it differently. So I'll give you 2 more minutes and then we'll go through the answers. So remember, it's need divided by have. Right then, answers. So remember, it's need and have. Need divided by have. The first one is the patient needs in 24 hours, 1,500 milligrams. In the trolley, we only have 125 milligrams, so it's going to be 1,500 divided by 125, which gives you 12 tablets. If I was prescribing that, if that was a calculation that I was doing and it was just for one dose, I would be querying the amount of tablets that we're giving the patient. But because it's over 24 hours, then that's reasonable because they're going to be split up in even doses. Next one is the prescription states that 150 milligrams of a drug is required. So the patient needs 150 milligrams. And it only comes in 100 milligram tablets. So it's going to be 150 divided by 100, which is going to give you 1.5 tablets. I've just put in brackets that half tablets aren't encouraged because it's easy to sort of not break them up in in a half, etc. What do we do with the other half? And sort of we do it sometimes, but it's not part of the medicines management agreements that we have. Third question, so this is where I've snuck this one in, just to sort of make sure that you're reading them. So that the drug that we've got, I've seen my spelling mistake now, you wouldn't believe I'd read this a million times, is 62.5 microgram tablets. And the patient's been prescribed 0.25 milligrams, so we've got a mismatch in our units. I don't mind whichever way you want to go, so you can go to micrograms or you can go to milligrams. My preference with this would be, and this is just my pure preference, is I would probably change it to micrograms because that's what the tablets are available in. That would be just my personal view, but you can change it either way as long as you're working in the same units. So if we're going from, we want to change milligrams to micrograms, then we need to make sure that we're multiplying by 1,000. So here we've got our first bit, 0.25, multiplied by 1,000 gives us 250 micrograms that we need. So we need 250, we have 62.5, and the patient needs 4 tablets. So that was just a bit of a sneaky one, but these are the sort of things that they might throw at you in the exam, just to think about and think about conversion. So it's testing you in a few different ways. Next question is your patient is prescribed 270 milligrams and the drug has been dispensed. That means that they're in the bottle. It means that they're in 90 milligram tablets. So how many tablets does he require? 3, yeah. So again, 270 divided by 90. Fairly straightforward. If you're concerned about remembering which order that they go in, need and have could be national health. So need and have to get them in the right order. Because when it comes to solutions, one of the ways that I teach it, we talk about the NHS as a formula to make sure you get you calculate your units, your numbers in the right order. So when it comes to finding out how many mils a patient might require, we can use formulas. So we can use WIG, so what you want divided by what you've got, multiplied by what it's in. I don't like WIG, and that's just my personal view, because the I doesn't go in the order that it should, in my brain tells me it should do. So that's why I like the NHS, because you'll never get that in the wrong order. So it's going to be need divided by have, multiplied by the solution that it's in. So the prescription will tell you what you need. The prescriber will have written up and said you want 150 milligrams. What you've got may well be, because it's fluid, may well be in a vial like this. And it may well say that it's got 50 milligrams in 10 mils or 50 milligrams in 2 mils. So your solution is what it's mixed up in. It's how much is in that vial. If you do this calculation, it will tell you how many mils that you need to give the patient specifically. So it's not about drawing up that full vial, because that full vial may overdose your patient. So you've got to think about how many mils do I draw up to give the right dose to my patient. So you can use the NHS or WIG. It's entirely up to you, whatever you've been used to. Intensive care tends to use WIG a lot, because that's especially the sort of the more mature nurses, because that's what initially we always were ever taught. NHS is a much newer way of trying to remember that formula. It works really well for me. So remember, it's need divided by have multiplied by the solution that it's in. So it means all the same thing. It'll give you exactly the same answer, but it's about you sticking with what works for you and the way that your learning style is. Right, you ready for this then? Okay, I'll ignore that. A drug comes in 20 millimoles in 5 mils, so that's what's in the vial. We've got 5 mils in that glass vial there, and if you draw up 5 mils, the whole of it will have 20 millimoles in there. But your patient has been prescribed 10 millimoles. It's been going to add into some fluid. And how many mils of the additive would you add into that normal saline? So what are you going to draw up into that syringe? Don't worry about adding it to normal saline. That's just there for the question. It's not there that you need to know. All I want to know is how much you will take out of here into here for your patient. So you need, and you can see I've colour-coded it here, you need 10 millimoles. You have in that vial 20 millimoles. And you need to multiply it by the solution, which is 5 mils. So if you remember that the order of all of that, your answer will be 2.5 mils, yeah? Trust me, the formulas work. Right then, there we are, there's one for you. No, but don't worry about it because it's all the same units. So just work with what you've got because it's the mils that you are concerned about. As long as they're the same units, you can ignore them. Trust me, honestly, don't worry about it. I knew when I wrote that one, I thought, shouldn't do that. Just had a question saying about millimoles. Is it the same as mils or milligrams? Millimoles is just a unit from that last question, but there were both millimoles in the question, so don't worry about it. These are both milligrams. I haven't snuck anything in. Once you've got your answer, have a check of it. Need divided by have multiplied by solution, or what you want divided by what you've got multiplied by what it's in. Are you all ready for the answer? 70 divided by 20 times 5 is going to give you 17.5 mils. Got it right. Did you get it right? Okay then, one more before I give you lots to do. Okay then. So what we need, 15 milligrams. We have 40 milligrams and the solution that it's in is 2 mils. So we would 15 divided by 40, multiplied by 2, 0.75 mil. Okay, so there's a few for you to do there just to get you thinking. Okay then, have you all done? Patient prescribed 40 milligrams of a drug. In the cupboard we've got 10 milligrams in 4 mils. How much does the patient require? 16 mils. Well done. So the key to it all is working out what the patient needs, what you have, and what it's mixed in. So the next one, 80 milligrams of a drug is prescribed. We've got 50 milligrams in 2 mils. How much is required? 3.2, well done. If you wanted to, you could just have a quick guess there, couldn't you? Because 50 milligrams in 2 mils, if you want 80, it's going to be higher than 2 mils. So if you got something that was lower, you'd recheck it. Patient is prescribed 75 milligrams. All you've got on the ward is 30 milligrams in 3 mils. How much stock is required? 7.5. Well done. So that's really good. Got one more section to do, and then we'll have a bit of a caffeine boost, I think, and then we'll finish off the session. So before you start, sometimes we've been showing you vials that say there's 30 milligrams in 3 mils or there's 50 milligrams in 10 mils. Sometimes we're required to find out how many milligrams per mil that there is. And sometimes you might go to the cupboard and find a big vial of a drug and a little vial of a drug, and it's the same drug, but it's just a bigger stock, and it might say 40 milligrams in 20 mils or 4 milligrams in 2 mils, but it's the same drug. Sometimes the fluid, this is a multi-dose, so this is what we can use for lots of different people. We'll just go, wipe the top, use our needle and syringe and draw up however much that patient requires and give it to the patient. We can then put it back in the cupboard and use it again for another patient. Or sometimes what we have in the small, like with the smaller vials, is that you draw up, then that's exactly what the patient needs. But sometimes we'll have a large bottle, or sometimes we'll have a small bottle. So we might need to just make sure that what we're drawing up is exactly the same as what's in the other bottle. So we might have to work out how many milligrams per mil there are in this vial there. So vial 1 says, on it you can see that clearly, that it says 40 milligrams in 20 mils. The smaller one, a bit harder to see, is 4 milligrams in 2 mils. If I wanted to work out how many milligrams per mil there is in each vial, I would need to divide 40 divided by 20, and that would give me, my first one was 2 milligrams per mil. If I did the next one, 4 divided by 2, it's going to give me the same answer. So I could use either vial knowing that there's the same dosage. If I draw up a mil, I know that that's 2 milligrams in that syringe there. If I drew up 3 mils there, then I would have 6 milligrams in my syringe. So because we know that for every mil I draw up in that syringe or pour out into a pot, that there will be 2 milligrams. So we can use a ratio approach. So if we needed 8 mils, then we would know exactly how many milligrams that would be there in that syringe. So we might have to do this just to confirm that we're giving the right dose to the patient, especially if we haven't got the same vial as we normally would use. So it's about having that principle of using that information. So some of them will tell you, because I hid that from you, 2 milligrams per mil. But it's about the principles of being able to sort of work it out and understand it. So there's some for you to do. So remember, it's the total dosage divided by the number of mils will give you milligrams per mil. Trust the process is what I'm going to say for this one. Trust the process. Okay then, let's look at the answers. What we're doing here is we're dividing that whole number of milligrams or units that's in that vial by the number of mils. So it means that we're just spreading it out equally over those 5 mils. So if we have 350 milligrams in 5 mils, the milligrams per mils are 70 milligrams per mil. So I would want to see something written like that. So if you're looking for your correct answer on your multiple choice, that's what you would want to see. I don't think they're as sneaky as putting the wrong units on. They're not that testing. They don't want to get you to get it wrong. 400 milligrams in 4 mils, nice easy one, is going to be 100 milligrams per mil. 4 milligrams in 20 mils. Now that's going to be, literally trust the process, it's 4 divided by 20, and that comes out at 0.2 milligrams per mil. This last one is a little bit of a sneaky one, and it sort of sometimes makes you think, is this right or wrong? We've got 1 milligram divided by 0.4 of a mil. So that's under a mil, so it's going to be high amount of milligrams. So if you did 1 divided by 0.4, it's going to come out at 2.5 milligrams per mil. Just because you've got less than a mil in the right-hand side there. Any questions so far? Right then, if you want to come back for 25 to 11, and then we'll get finished through the last part. Okay then, let's get started. Shh. Just before we do start, I'm just conscious, I can't hear it at the bottom, but I do know the further back you sit, that if people are talking, it's very difficult sometimes to hear what we're saying. So just be respectful of everybody. I don't mind you talking whilst you're doing your calculations and everything, but just be aware that it can be very difficult to hear the further back you sit. Any questions from the first part? Anything that you've thought of over coffee that you think you want clarifying or you'd like clarifying? Yes? You know when you're divided by 1,000? Yeah. So if you're multiplying, you'll go to the right. If you're dividing, you'll go to the left. So that's how I remember it. So it's just, that's why I like the linear bit, because and the way with the arrows, it just tells me which way that I need to go. Any other questions? That's good. Good. So what we're going to be talking about now, and for some of the next few slides, is we're talking about the amount of sort of volume and liquids that we might want to give to our patients. And we do have different ways of doing it, so it may well be if it's used by what we call a pump, so a device that gives the fluid on a regular amount over a period of time, and it's usually in mils per hour. So it will give the fluid, no matter whether the patient lifts their arm up or not, it will actually push the fluid through. Other ways of delivering the fluid is just by looking in the drip chamber. So when you've seen people with IV fluids, they've got a drip chamber, and looking at the amount of drops that we're actually going to give that individual. So what we need to think about is conversions, so the metric measurements and changes from litres to millilitres. Thank goodness it's still working in thousands. So it's whether we want to go from litres to millilitres, we need to go from that higher unit to that lower unit, so we need to multiply by 1,000. And if we want to go from mils or millilitres up to litres, we will need to divide by 1,000. Again, this ladder approach isn't my favoured way, but for some people it depends on your learning styles, learning preferences, that you will like it in slightly different ways. The way that I like it, and it makes more sense to me, as I say, because it's the way that my decimal point goes and moves to do my conversions there. So working out those calculations, beware that we're going to be talking about infusion devices in mils per hour. So we might have to convert, if that prescription says litres, into mils per hour, because it will give us that wrong calculation. So sometimes what you'll see is an infusion that a patient's been prescribed intravenously, so it'd be on a separate prescription. It won't be in that. It won't necessarily be in the first part of the drug card, and the patient's required 1,000 mils of 0.9% of sodium chloride over 10 hours. What I can say at this point, I'm not interested in what fluid I'm going to be giving. All I'm interested in is the amount of fluid, so the amount in mils and the hours that it's going to go over. This could say glucose, it could say dextrosaline, it could say Hartmann solution, it could be anything. All we want to know is how many mils per hour does that patient need to get that total of 1,000 mils over that 10-hour period. So what I would do is get rid of that. And if you're overawed by too many words, just get the numbers that are relevant to what you want to do. So all I'm thinking of is that amount of fluid. So there's my 1,000 mils in that bag of fluid that I want to give my patient. I'm going to be giving it via an infusion pump, because then that will deliver that fluid evenly of that volume of fluid that the machine's set at over that period of 10 hours. And then that will hopefully give me, the patient, nice even amounts of fluid and not overloading by them suddenly getting 1,000 mils straight away, stat into that patient. Usually we will only give the large amount if that patient is critically ill. We want to give it in a nice controlled manner. So the way that we would do that is we would look at the total volume in mils and divide it by the number of hours that we've got. And that would then give us 100 mils over those every hour for 10 hours to give that patient 1,000 mils. So it's controlled by the infusion device, so we would set that at 100 mils per hour. Remember that infusion devices can go to 1 decimal place, so when we're doing our calculations, I will be expecting you to work out to 1 decimal place if there's lots of numbers after that decimal point. So when it comes to that calculation, so the formula is the volume to be infused in mils divided by the infusion time in hours. And this is for the mechanical devices, because we can be very accurate in the amount that we're giving. And that will give us the answer in mils per hour, because the infusion devices work on the hourly basis. So they will deliver a portion of that fluid that will add up to 100 mils every hour, and then the next hour it will be another 100 mils, and after that, and then after 10 hours it will be completed. So if we had a patient who had a litre of normal saline, and remember we don't really care what the fluid is that we're giving the patient. We would do as we go to the patient, because we want to give them the right fluid. But at this point, we want to know what that device is going to be sat at. So 1 litre of normal saline over 4 hours, how many mils per hour will that infusion device need to be set? So think about it. We're working in mils per hour, so we need to convert that litre. So otherwise, it's 1 divided by 4 will give you a totally inaccurate amount that needs to go through. So if you've got the infusion here, we would need it at 250 mils per hour. Yeah? Let's see if my calculations are right. So you need to do that first part of the formula first. And just beware, it's not just me being sneaky, this is what will happen in practice. Medical prescribers will often sometimes put 1 litre, or they might put 1,000 mils, but they're more likely to put 1 litre. So just be aware for that and make sure that you know that it's in mils per hour. So 250 mils per hour. So there we are, some for you to do. So remember, the formula is mils, the volume in mils, divided by the number of hours it has to run over, and it will give you the answer in mils per hour. Some of them say to 1 decimal place, some of them are just to, don't actually stipulate what they want you to, just be aware of that. How are you all doing? Are you done? Anybody want any extra time? Oh, so I thought I heard somebody say yes. I think I might be going deaf a little bit. I'll give you a minute more just to go over it. Remember that they want to be to one decimal place. So if you just look at your answers and make sure that you've got the number after the decimal place to the right, whether it's gone up or down. Okay then. So 1,000 mils is what we're interested in, and 6 hours is the other bit that we're interested in, that first question. Shh. 1,000 mils divided by 6 gives you 166.7 mils per hour. The answer is 166.666666, but to one decimal place. If you look at the you look at the 0.6, and there's a 6 after it, so it's 4 or above. It's above 4, so we need to do it to 0.7 rather than 166.6. So the next question was 0.5 of a litre, so that we need to change that to 500 mils, and then divide that by 8 hours, and that will give you 62.5 mils per hour. So that was a bit sneaky putting that 0.5 of a litre in, but again, it's getting into that practice of making sure that we know that what the formula worked out in. Question number 3 is 1 litre, so we need to convert that to millilitres, which is 1 times 1,000, which will give us 1,000 mils, divided by 12 is going to give us, to one decimal place, 83.3. The answer is 83.33333, but when we look at that second number past the decimal point, it's a 3, so it's 4 or below, so we keep it at that number that it's already at. Question 4, 500 mils of fluid is to run over 5 hours. That's going to be 100 mils per hour. So 500 mils, if you give 100 mils every hour for 5 hours, it's going to be 500 mils. And the last one is a smaller volume, is 100 mils over 4 hours, and that's going to be 25 mils per hour. They are quite common calculations that you will come across in practice when you're working out there. Ideally, if we run it via an infusion device, we will be to one decimal place. Not all areas will have infusion devices available to them. So sometimes you'll see the nurses stood in front of the giving sets or the drip line, looking at the little chamber and counting the drops, because that's how we can tell whether it's going too fast or too slow. So what we have, when I talk about the chamber, this is what I mean. This top bit at the end of a line that goes into the patient's vein via their cannula. And what we need to know is, have we got enough drops going through that chamber to make sure that that patient will have that 500 mils of fluid over 5 hours, or 100 mils over 4 hours, or a litre over 6 hours? Is it going at the right drip rate to do it? And you'll see them adjusting the drip rate when you see them in practice by the roller ball there, and it'll speed up the rate that the drops go through, or slow them down to try and slow that infusion down. So sometimes when we don't have the infusion devices available, we use slightly different giving sets. And the reason why we use slightly different giving sets, and the giving sets are the lines that we give the infusion in, is all to do with the size of the drops. Technical stuff in nursing. We're looking at how many drops are actually going through that chamber to tell us whether it's going too fast or too slow. What it does do is on the packaging, it actually tells us how many drops constitute 1 ml. So you can see there on this packaging, as you're getting it out, ready to put your fluid and run your fluid through to attach to your patient, it will tell you how many drops make up a ml. And this one says 20 drops equals 1 ml, and it varies from different manufacturers and the type of fluid that you give in, because it'll either be bigger drops or smaller drops that we give. Because we know that for every 20 drops that goes through that chamber, we're giving 1 ml, it helps us work out our calculation to how many mils in that sort of that we need to give our patient over so many hours. What it does tell us is that we've got a standard. 20 drops is 1 ml, so 10 drops would be half a ml, 40 drops would give us 2 mils. So it helps us with that calculation. So it just gives you that thought process. But what we do recommend, and you wouldn't be doing it on your own, is just check how many drops make up that ml. So you can imagine there's a nice formula for this to work out how many mils that we need to give our patient, or how many drops we need to give our patients every minute. And this is slightly different. When we're working this calculation out, it's drops per minute, because we can't stand there for an hour and count all the drops, so we do it per minute so that we know that we're at the right speed. So what we've got here is we've got our 1,000 mils again, our 1 litre bag of fluid, it doesn't matter what it is. We've got our drip chamber, and it might be a micro drip or it might be a macro drip, so large or small. The types of drops that we've got, if you can see here, they're smaller. But this one has got 20 drops per mil, so we're sticking with the 20 drops per mil. So how we work out how many drops should go through that chamber per minute, the formula for this is the volume in mils divided by time in minutes. So slightly different from when we were using the infusion devices where it was time in hours. This is time in minutes, and then we need to multiply that by the drop factor or drip factor. It doesn't matter. Some people will say drops, some people will say drips. And that will give us the rate that the infusion needs to run through in drops per minute. And we can only work in whole drops. So when you get your answer, if it's 67.2, we will just keep it at 67, keep it at a whole number. So that's your formula. Trust in the formula. It's mils divided by minutes multiplied by drops. So it's about learning the way of getting that in the right order, but also remembering that this is in minutes rather than hours. So that is the difference between the two formulas that we're using here. So you've got a patient. 500 mils has been prescribed. Don't worry about what fluid it is at the minute. It's got to run over 4 hours, and we need to give, the set delivers 20 drops per mil. So the first thing that we need to be thinking about is, it's 4 hours, we need to convert that into minutes. So then we'll need to do that conversion before we start the rest of the calculation. So it's going to be 4 times 60 is 240 minutes. So we've got our minutes. So we've got 500 mils divided by 240 minutes, and then multiplied by 20, which will give us 42 drops per minute. It actually gives us 41.6666 drops, but because we can't have parts of the drops, we would round it up because it's 5 or above. So the answer will always be in a whole number. So if you've got a multiple choice answer, always look at whether it's a whole number or not. Make sure you either round it up or round it down according to what that number is. So you're ready for it then? You're ready to have a go? There's your first one. So the patient is to receive 250 mils of dextrose over 3 hours, and the given set delivers at 10 drops per mil. Okay then. So the key thing here is not to sort of fall into that trap about hours. We need to convert those hours to minutes. So it's going to be 250 mils, because that's what the total volume that we need. Is going to be divided by the minutes, which is going to be 180 minutes, and then multiplied by 10. And so your answer, 13.88 drops per minute, but we need to round that up to a whole number, is going to be 14 drops per minute. So 250 divided by the 180 and multiplied by that by 10. The 5% dextrose doesn't count. Well, it will do when you go to your patient, but it doesn't count at this calculation. So any fluid of 250 mils that needs to be delivered over 3 hours will be set at 14 drops per minute. So you would then look at the chamber and count on whilst that there's 14 drops go through every minute. And you'll tweak it up and tweak it down to make sure it's the right speed. Okay, so there's one more for you there. Okay then. Total volume is 440 mils. The 4 hours is going to be divided by 240 minutes, multiplied by the drop factor, which is 15. So what did you get? 27. Why? Because after the decimal point, there's a 4. So it's 4 or below. That 9's fooled you. Mine says 27.4999. So it's going to be, it's 4.4. Shh. All the number that we're interested in after the decimal point is 4. We don't care about all the other numbers. So, well, if it says 5, then they've rounded it up. Mine says, but yours has gone to 1 decimal place, hasn't it? That's what it is. But mine, the way that I've calculated it on my calculator, it's 27.4. Sorry? No, if it's 27.5, then you be quiet, everybody. If you round it up, then it would be. If it says 27.5, then it would become 28. Yeah. 5 and above, 4 or below, we stay where we are. Don't worry if you've got slightly different. It's obviously the way your calculators are set up. Mine's set up to about 8 numbers past the decimal place. If there was anything controversial, then so we thought that everybody's got it wrong, and why have they got it wrong, and and we worked it out on a different calculator, you would not be penalised. So please just rest assured you would not be penalised. And if everybody in the whole cohort got the question wrong, we would be then thinking, what's gone wrong there? So don't panic about that, because I know that you need your 80% and I know that that's important to you. So don't worry, it's just the different calculations. I've just done it on mine and it worked out one way. Just done it on a different calculator and like you've done it, and it's worked it out a different way. But do not panic about that. That's all I will say. A simple calculator you can take in. You can take it that's not provided. So you can either use the computer calculator or you can take your own simple calculator in. Sorry, shush, shush, shush.
I think people have not pressed equals after they've done the, so the 440 divided by 240 equals 1.83. And then you've got to then times it by the 15. But some people have not done the equals. Right, so maybe it's that. Yeah, the other way, if you do it equals, that gives you that answer, but if you do it the other way...
Right, so it might be the way that you've processed the calculation and not pressed equaled. That's a suggestion that might... Does it change it then, everybody? Shh. Be quiet, please.
Getting your answer and then putting it, then doing it and bringing your 1.8 something. Did you then bring that down to one decimal place?
No. Do your one decimal place at the end, otherwise it will change the answer.
I'm just thinking, how will we all go?
No, I think some of it's to do with the equal and some of it's the way that it's done. I think that's what it sounds as though that's the way that it's happened.
iPhones round up as well, you said.
Oh, apparently iPhones round up as well. Yeah, I didn't know that, so don't use your iPhone. Use your calculator. There's always some controversy, no matter how many times I test things. Right then, shh. Please do not worry if there's things, but it's worth knowing and I never knew that calculators rounded up, so that's something that I've learnt today. So when I teach this to my other students, then when there is that controversy, I do know, but it's something we'll bear in mind when it comes to questions and writing the answers down, because it wouldn't be fair to put 27.3, 27.4, 27.5, etc. But just be aware of the nuances. Don't round things up or down until you get to that final answer, and that's what you need to do. And it's the same as when we're looking at BMIs. Don't round up and round down until we actually get to the end of it. So sometimes, I'm conscious that time is ticking on, we have to look at weight-related drugs, or the prescription might include that patient's weight. So here we've got a patient whose weight is 68 kilos, and they are prescribed 30 milligrams per kilos. That means that for every kilo that patient weighs, they would need 30 milligrams of that drug. So if they're 68 kilos, the formula will be 30 multiplied by 68, and that will give us our total amount in milligrams. We'll get rid of the kilograms because we've done that calculation. In milligrams, it will be the answer, that total dose that patient requires. So it's going to be 30 times 68 will equal milligrams. If it's written in micrograms, the answer will come in micrograms, that obvious thing. If it's written in units, the answer will be in units. So it's whatever units are written or prescribed by that medical prescriber. So the total that's required is 2,040 milligrams. Sometimes you might be asked to spread that over a 24-hour period, so it might be that's the total number of dosage, and that might have to be spread out over four different areas. So it might be 2,040 divided by 4, and that will give us equal dosages to give to that patient. But make sure you read the question, because it might say, what is the total dosage that patient requires? Or it might say, what is the dosage required for each, of those 3 periods? So if you were going to give it to a patient over 4 doses, how much would you give your patient? It's going to be exactly the same. It's going to be your total dosage divided by those 4 periods, and that should come to 510 milligrams each. If you work that out on your calculator, that's exactly what it should come to. So make sure you read the question. Anything that's got a forward slash, it means per, so 30 milligrams per kilogram. So if you want to know how much your patient will require, it just means that you need to multiply that dose by their weight. And then it's whether you actually give them that in the total dosage in one go, or whether you split it up to whatever's prescribed. Because some drugs are every 3 times a day, might be 4 times a day, might be 6 times a day. So it will vary. So, got some for you to do there. Remember, look at the units. Whatever units are prescribed are the number of units that you require. It hasn't asked you to do it. Is there lots of point numbers afterwards? 1.5, so it would just do it to whatever you've got. If there's lots of numbers, then usually I would put... And it's the same as in the exam. It depends if you're asked, look out for that to 1 decimal place, whole number, etc., because that's what we want you to put the answer to. I haven't put anything together, so you might need to just write them all down. But it's only the ones that we're using today.
Is this just all formulas?
That's all the formulas for your exams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right,
so
thank you.
there will be other formulas, but yeah. Okay then. So fairly straightforward ones. It's the dosage multiplied by the weight. So the first one is 182.5 milligrams. Unless I have changed the dosages, so I do apologise if that's me working on a weekend, shouldn't be allowed. 109.5, I've changed it. Just testing, just testing. I normally go through them and I haven't done them this time. As I say, I normally work them in the calculator whilst I'm stood here. So I may have changed the other ones as well. That'll teach me. 40 milligrams multiplied by 12. 480. 400. Got Slip of the typo there. 400 micrograms by 44. 17,600 micrograms. 275 units multiplied by 61 kilos. Yep, I can hear 16,775 units. So remember, if it asks you in units, keep in the units. And the last one is 4 milligrams multiplied by 10. There we are, well done. So there's just a few more to do, but with a bit extra twist on it. And I'm going to check these ones. So there's lots of words in here, but it's still exactly the same as what you've been doing. It's just a matter of picking out the numbers that are relevant. And the per day just means in that total 24 hours. You don't have to do anything with that. It's just telling you the date that it is. So it's still the same calculation, but your answer would be in milligrams per day or micrograms per day, etc. The other nice thing about these questions, it actually tells you the units to put, doesn't it, as well at the end. Tells you, asks you what's a single dose in milligrams. Just give you a minute more to get it finished. Okay then. So these are exactly the same, just written slightly differently. So it's still going to be 40 multiplied by 15, but then it's going to be divided by the number of doses, and that will give you the dose for each single dose. So the first one is going to be 200 milligrams per dose. The next one is that 20 kilo child who requires 80 milligrams per kilo a day. It's going to be 400 milligrams because we're going to do the multiplication, then divide it by 4. 58 times 100 and then divided by 8 doses. 725 milligrams per dose. Second one is 40 multiplied by 92 divided by 6 is going to give us 920 milligrams per dose. A lot of the time, if you're working in intensive care, if you're working in paediatric intensive care, NICU, or working with children, you're going to be looking at weight of a child times the dose that's required to make sure you do give them that therapeutic dose. So it's something that it's well worth doing. You may have to change your units as well. So some questions might ask you, if a patient requires 400 milligrams 4 times a day, what is the total dosage in grams? So we've changed from milligrams to grams, so there may be that extra step to do. So then you would do your calculations, 1600 milligrams, converting that to grams, we need to divide by 1,000, and that will give us 1.6 grams. We do that with paracetamol a lot, don't we? Paracetamol come in milligrams, 500 milligrams, but we're only allowed to have 4 grams in one day, and sometimes so you will see them written in different units at that point. So just 3 to do, and then we're nearly there. We're just going to do BMIs. So just think back to the beginning of the day, beginning this morning when we talked about conversions. Okay, then 1 more minute and then I'll go through the answers. Okay then. So here we've got 250 micrograms to be given 3 times a day. So that's going to be our first part of our calculation, and it's going to give us the answer in micrograms. We then need to convert to milligrams. So it's going to be 750 micrograms. Then we want to convert into milligrams. So it's going to be divide. So it's going to give us 0.75 milligrams. So I've taken the 0 off because it doesn't really mean anything, because it's not, if you've done it on your calculator, it'll say 0.750. So you don't need to put that, it's just the numbers that we're interested in. The next one was to make sure that you're reading, because it doesn't ask you to convert, because the answers are asking you for milligrams. So the answer is 750 milligrams. And the last one, 0.5 milligrams is given twice a day, so that's going to be 1 milligram. And then we need to convert that to micrograms, so that needs to be multiplied by 1,000. So it should be 1,000 micrograms. Okay. Any questions with those? It's just working your way through and remembering. Right then, shh. Last push, you've all done really well. For those of you that are really a whiz at this, well done for working them out, and you sort of do it very quickly. For those of you that are sort of new to it or need brushing up on it because it's things that you've done in the past, but if you don't use it, you get a bit rusty with it. Well done for having a go. What we're going to finish off finally with is BMIs. You either love them or hate them. This is the formula, so it's weight in kilos divided by meters squared. And that's the height. So here we've got a patient who weighs 80 kilos, and the height is documented at 183 centimetres. So the weight is in the right units, but the height needs to be converted from centimetres to metres. So we know that there's 100 centimetres in a metre. So it means that we're going to be doing 183 divided by 100, and that should give us 1.83. So we're working in the right units now. The next thing I would recommend to do is then work out your metres squared. Metres squared literally means the number multiplied by itself. So if you've got 2 metres, it's 2 times 2 is 4. If you've got 1.5 metres, it's 1.5 times 1.5, which is 2.25. So it's multiplied by itself. This is where you need your pen and paper, or I need my pen and paper, and to work it out. So what we would do is get our formula. 1.83 times 1.83 should come out at 3.3489. That's what it comes out on my calculator at. I wouldn't shorten that at all. So the next part of my calculation is going to be 80, so the weight divided by 3.3489 gives me 23.88844, which I would round up if I was asked to 24, because all I'm interested in is that first 8 after that decimal point. That's the formula. That is the formula there. It shows you that in metric. There is another way of working it out, which you might find less faffy. But again, stick to what you like. Don't feel as though you have to change for it. Because you could actually have kilograms, so 80 kilos divided by 1.83 divided by 1.83, and it will give you exactly the same answer. So it depends what you like. If you don't want to faff about multiplying or squaring the height by itself, you can divide it twice. So divide it and then divide it again, and it will give you exactly the same answer. Some like it, some don't. I like both. It makes no odds to me, but if I want to check, I'll sometimes use the opposite one to what I've used. So you get the gist of this now. There's some for you to do. BMI is a formula that is worth remembering. Pardon? Only if you're asked. I can't remember what I've done for this one. I want you to, yes, I've put a whole number on these ones. So, yeah. That's what I've done, haven't I? We've stopped. Oh.